With sticky inflation, high interest rates, soaring food prices, and the cost of living on pretty much everyone's mind, a lot of people have pointed out that taxation in Canada isn't helping. And while taxes pay for all of the public services we want, and more importantly, need, Canada is now in a position where Ottawa spends more on debt servicing payments than we do on healthcare transfers. And that uncomfortable reality has many people asking some tough questions about how much the government collects in taxes and how much it spends. One of those vocal critics is Jay Goldberg, Ontario Director with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who joins us now in studio. Jay, thank you very much for sitting down with us today.
Great to be here.
So, one major issue you've been vocal about is the payroll tax. Where do we stand right now in regards to the payroll tax in Canada, and what does the CTF want done on that issue?
Well, what we'd like to see is a freeze in payroll taxes for the upcoming year because we know, look, there's stats out there showing that 50% of Canadians are $200 away from not being able to pay their bills. And the Trudeau government, starting in January, is going to hike payroll taxes by up to $347 a person. And when you're looking at $200 away from not being able to pay your bills, payroll tax is all of a sudden going up by $347. That's a heck of a lot of money, and it's going to push even more people to the brink. So certainly we'd like to see a freeze, but taxpayers should expect this to be coming in on January 1st.
And there was a lot of debate on CPP, whether or not it is a tax, and not to rehash that debate, but CPP payments are also increasing. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the CPP payment that the average worker is going to have to contribute, it's going to go up by $113 next year, which is over $10 a month if you average that out. Of course, one of the problems with the CPP is the relatively low returns, and you're forcing people to give more and more of their paycheck to the CPP when they could be investing, for example, in an RSP that will do 2 or 3 times as well. So it's a restriction in choice and saving for retirement as much as it is hurting the budgets of Canadians.
What about the argument that Canadians aren't responsible enough to make that call for themselves? Because obviously that's one of the justifications is we have to force CPP because if we leave Canadians to their own demise, they'll suffer that demise.
Well, a couple of points. First of all, the CPP was there. What they're doing now is ramping it up. So it's not a question of taking away the CPP entirely. It could be just a question of leaving it where it is and doing everything we can to encourage people to save for retirement. Obviously, there's preferential tax rules. You get great benefit from contributing to your RSP. We could talk about more things like that, other options, but ultimately, we have to treat taxpayers as adults. We have to make sure that, as citizens, we know retirement's coming down the line. We know that we can invest in our retirement and, have a lot more for when we get to retirement age. And so, you don't just want to live in a country where the attitude to everything is, well, people are irresponsible, they can't look after themselves, and government has to do everything.
You mentioned returns on CPP. Is there a generational divide here? Because obviously younger people are going to be suffering or paying for longer with this increase. Is there a generational gap now between people who were taxpayers and who may be closer to retirement now than young gentlemen like you and I who are maybe a lot further away from retirement?
Yeah. It's definitely a reality that people are facing. If you contributed to the CPP in its very early years, returns were very, very high. But gradually over time, as our population started to age and as people started to work a little bit longer, returns have gone further and further down. And in recent years in particular, performance has not been good. And so I think a lot of Canadians are questioning, I have to give this large chunk of my paycheck that goes towards the CPP that's not going to be nearly as much of a payoff for me in retirement as it would be if I could invest it with my own investment advisor. And so I think that's what a lot of Canadians are frustrated with. And the Trudeau government made the decision to ramp up the CPP instead of leaving it where it is, which is just taking more out of your paycheck and not allowing you to have that extra cash to put away for retirement on your own.
We have about 40 seconds here before we go to break. What about the idea of an opt-out or a forced savings account?
I think an opt-out is a great idea. I think that if you can show the government, for example, that you are putting money away for retirement and you're doing it on your own, You're investing it on your own. You have your advisors. I think that's a phenomenal idea because ultimately it's about giving people choice and treating people as adults. And so
Yeah.
if taxpayers can make more decisions with their own money preparing for retirement, that's a good thing.
We're back. I'm sitting down with Jade Goldberg. We're talking about pretty much everything under the umbrella of tax policy. One of the measures that we saw to give Canadians some relief were pauses on the gas tax, in many senses to help people deal with inflation, the rising costs of virtually everything. But those taxes are set to kick back in at some point.
Yeah.
Where do we stand across the country, province to province, on when those taxes come back, and how much of a price increase are Canadians going to be looking at the pump?
It's interesting. It's going to be substantial, and there's definitely variation province to province. So if you look at Ontario, for example, the Ford government cut the gas tax by 6.4 cents a liter
Hmm.
in July of 2022, and this was making good on a promise they'd made 4 years earlier
Yep.
to help deal with high gas prices and the cost of living. So that's been extended until June 30th this year, so it will have been in place for 2 years. But if the Ford government doesn't act to extend it further, what it's going to mean is that gas prices will shoot up by 6.4 cents per liter on Canada Day. If you look at other provinces, Alberta has had a fuel tax holiday
Yep.
entirely for several months, actually more than a year. But the premier there, Daniel Smith, has made the decision to bring the gas tax back in the new year,
Okay.
January the 1st, but it's coming in at about 9 cents a liter instead of the 13 that it was before. And then actually, you're seeing some good news from the NDP out of Manitoba.
Yeah. Wob Canoe.
Bob Canoe made the decision to cut gas taxes, scrap the provincial gas tax for beginning for a period of 6 months, starting on
Hmm.
January the 1st. So when Albertans see their taxes go up, Manitoba is going to go down. And actually, Manitoba will have the lowest gas taxes in Canada between January 1st and when the tax cut expires on June the 30th.
I mean, that's quite a dichotomy politically in the grand scheme of conservative and or progressive
Yeah.
premiers. Um, One thing I want to ask you is the gas tax, many people argue in favor of it on two fronts: paying for infrastructure and having some sort of mechanism to discourage consumption on the emissions and climate grounds. Are those good enough reasons to bring the gas tax back at its standard level?
Uh, no, I don't think so. And if you look at provinces like Ontario, like Alberta, cutting the gas tax has not been a substantial hit on the province's bottom line.
Hmm.
What we've seen is that irresponsible spending, such as handing out billions to Volkswagen and Stellantis,
Yep.
had a much more significant impact on the budget than giving people a break at the pumps. The other thing is, we have to think about where people are. If you're living in downtown Toronto and gas prices are high, you might be able to take the subway or walk to work
Yeah.
instead. But if you're living in Sudbury or Thunder Bay, you still got to get to work. You still got to bring your kids to school, get to the grocery store. None of that is optional. And so, in terms of discouraging behavior, that's not really the reality that most people face.
Yeah, it's an inelastic good for many people in the province because
Exactly.
those types of quick transit options aren't necessarily available. What about alcohol taxes? We know that last year the federal government capped the escalator tax being the tax that automatically increases taxes on alcohol indexed to inflation every year. Where do we stand on that moving forward? Is that coming back full blast on April 1st?
That's the plan. And the escalator tax is one of the most undemocratic taxes you could possibly have. It doesn't force politicians to stand up in the House of Commons and vote to raise your taxes. The Trudeau
Hmm.
government imposed this escalator tax so that it would happen automatically. And so this coming April 1st, booze taxes are going to go up by 4.7%.
Okay.
That's across the board. And as you well know, over half of the price of beer is taxed,
Yep.
3/4 of the price of spirits. So we're already paying more in taxes for our alcohol than the actual cost of the alcohol. And that's going to go up by 4.7% if we don't see action like we did last year
Hmm.
from the federal government to decrease that increase.
We only have about a minute here, but the carbon tax, a lot of debate between premiers and the prime minister on the carbon tax. Where do we stand moving forward? Is the carbon tax going up and when?
It's going up on April 1st. It's going to go up from $65 a ton to $80 a ton.
April Fools?
Yeah, April Fool's Day, of course, along with the booze
Yep.
taxes. And that will mean at the pumps, prices go up by 3.3 cents per liter. So that's not insignificant for sure. And so the carbon tax, that'll be going up. But we also have to think of the cascading impacts. So there's certain fuels on farms that are still taxed under the carbon tax.
Yep.
That makes food more expensive. Shipping the food from the farm to the store, when fuel taxes are higher, that makes that more expensive. So it's just going to help to further fuel inflation. And frankly, we haven't come anywhere close to meeting most of our Paris Climate Accord targets. And
Jay,
so the
I got to
argument
cut
that,
you off. I
yeah,
apologize there. We got to go to break, but we appreciate you sitting down with us.
you bet.